very much Brother Gene Lotz, longtime historian and member of Windsor Lodge 403. You're not the current historian, but you have been working on a very special project. So if you want to take a few moments and tell us, first of all, about that, what you've been working on for the last, year and a half?
I've been working on a book about the war dead for Windsor and Essex County. And I got started on that when in 2000, the district in Windsor and Essex County decided to do a Millennium Project, and that project was to build a war memorial in Malden Park, a Masonic War Memorial. And I compiled the names of all the war dead in Windsor and Essex County, and then I compiled all the names of Masons that had died during the wars and put the two together and came up with the Masonic War Dead, which we put on the monument in Malden Park. So when the pandemic started happening, a lot of free time, I decided, well, this is a good time to, complete this project and write a book about the war dead from Windsor and Essex County for the 20th century.
Now, tell us about where did your interest in history come? Is it something that Freemasonry cultivated, or did you always have an interest in history?
No, well, Freemasonry definitely cultivated it. I always had an interest in history, historic sites, but Masonry really helped me delve into a area of history that really wasn't well written about, and that was Masonry, local Masonry in particular. What got me going was there is a cornerstone in the Masonic Temple here in Windsor from 1804. And it really perked my interest because nobody knew where this cornerstone came from. And I spent over a year trying to figure out where it came from. 1804, there wasn't a whole lot around here, especially made out of brick. There were log cabins and log houses and that, but nothing made out of bricks. And I finally traced it to a windmill that stood along the Detroit River out in LaSalle, which is a small community just outside of Windsor. So that's what got me going in history.
Now, we should backtrack. I probably put the cart before the horse. Why don't you take a few moments, tell everybody who you are and how you became involved in Freemasonry.
Well, my name's Gene Lotz, and I'm an ordained deacon in the Anglican Church. I became involved in Masonry when my grandmother told me that my grandfather had been a Freemason and that I should be a Freemason. And she told me that when I was 20, and it took, after she passed away, I started thinking about things, and I said, I should really check out what my mom told me, that I should be a Freemason. And, here I am. I'm a past master of Windsor Lodge. I'm a past Grand Standard Bearer, Grand Lodge officer. And for many, many years, I was the district historian of the Windsor District and the Erie District, which is the rest of Essex County.
Now, you have done a lot of work in terms of the preservation of the physical, records as historian. I mean, all the boxes in the safe. Tell us just about that project, how it started, how it came about, and the work you did.
Well, I was finding, poking around the temple, I was finding minute books that were 120 years old, and they just were sitting in a shelf. So I decided to set up an archives and take those minute books and put them in acid-proof boxes and just catalog them, put them in boxes and put them in a safe place, so there they have a home. And that's how the Windsor District Archives was started. And that, finding old minute books and you start reading the stories, it became a hobby to look up events that happened in the minute book, such as laying a cornerstone of a building. I'd look it up in the local newspaper at the time, go down to the university, get the microfilm out, and look up and see, what the eyewitness account of the event. And then we started, there's, I believe, 12 buildings in Windsor that had their cornerstone laid by the Masons. Well, we started putting out granite tablets in front of these buildings saying that this building had its cornerstone laid by the Masonic fraternity on such and such a date by so-and-so. And that's how the Windsor Masonic Heritage Markers started. Cameron is part of that because City Hall recently laid their cornerstone, and the old cornerstones are still there. They were rededicated. And the new cornerstone from 3 years ago was laid by the Grand Master due to Cameron's efforts. And that's quite a nice tradition. Anytime I go down to City Hall to see those, 3 cornerstones, one from 1856, one from, I believe, 1883, and then one from 2017.
Yeah, that was a very special event. I still remember it very fondly, and to have those there. And a big thank you to the city for allowing us to do that. This has kind of been my own personal bailiwick of late, but it's something I care a lot about is, and I'm curious of your opinion as a historian, as the many-year district historian, is the digital preservation of documents and archives. I think back to very recently, Zanesville, Ohio, which their Masonic Temple, Masonic building, had a massive fire, and all of their documents, or the vast majority of their documents, letters, correspondence, charters, all dating, 200 years and older, they've lost. Other Masonic buildings in Vancouver, were victims of arson, even in Ireland. And then there's also just wear and tear of things like water damage, mice can get to them, things like that. So I've really been trying to encourage, and we did a presentation about this in my affiliated lodge, Harmony, about trying to make sure we have and we protect the physical copies and physical paper, but also create a digital backup. So at least we have a record of it if something were to happen to them. From your perspective as a historian, have you come across other examples of digital archiving, and what are your thoughts on digital preservation of material?
Digital preservation, we have to remember that digital preservation is not going to replace the original documents. And if you think it's going to, then you're kidding yourself, because it's not. Who knows what kind of digital formats will be around in 100 years? We don't know. So the other side of the coin to that is, the first and foremost, we have to preserve the documents we have. But digitally preserving them or digitally recording them is important because it makes them more accessible. It makes, you hate to give a 200-year-old minute book to somebody to leaf through to look for some dates. Much better to say, well, here, look through it on this. So that's the real important, for me, the important thing to have a digital record, because it makes things easily accessible. Does it preserve the information? Yes. For how long? We don't know. Look at how many formats have changed already in the digital age, and the digital age is only 30 years old. And how many different formats have we gone through? So 100, 200 years, how many formats are going to, are you going to be able to reproduce those digitally? We don't know. But definitely digital preservation plays a part, making these documents more accessible and preserving that information to a degree.
That brings up an interview I did with Michael Fish, who's the head archivist for the City of Windsor, the library, and he talked about that very same problem as an archivist. He said one challenge he foresees in the coming decades is having digital information that we're not able to retrieve because it's on an obsolete format, right? Like how many people have floppy disk drives, how much storage is there, and that just goes to, one thing that's part of that then is, and this is a more question for lodges in general, right, is you can have historians at the district level, and many districts do, but even at the lodge level, how important is a historian, and how important is it for somebody to be keeping track of the information that a lodge is producing? Not only finding information from the past, but even current information, like making sure the minute books are accessible, both perhaps digitally and on paper, and just taking the time to make sure everything's up to date, and you don't have minutes on floppy disk drives or minutes that are being lost, or even physically minutes books that are at risk of element damage.
Yeah, you can't have documents in a 3-ring binder for 50 years. There's going to be nothing left of those documents. So they have to be in a bound book to be preserved. Grand Lodge does have a policy that they want it on paper. And, there's a lot of people say, oh, you don't need it on paper. Well, you do. Because, good point, the 7.5-inch floppies. Well, how many of those are around? If you had one, who would you take it to get the information off it? And what software would they have, let alone the hardware, that could read that? I donated a memory board to the museum here in Windsor. And it was about this big, and it was about 1 inch thick. It was a 1K memory board from the 1980s. Things have changed. Technology changes so much that the information that's on that now, you could never get it off there. Now, there was only 1,000K, or 1K, I'm sorry. So there's 1,000 bits, but that information it's unlockable. Even though it's physically there, it's digitally unlockable. So I don't know, did I answer your question?
You do. I guess my question more is then where does that leave a lodge in terms of its officer positions? Historian and secretary were the two main ones. In terms of, and even the worshipful master of the year, making sure that minutes are being put onto paper, but also, if minutes of a meeting are saved on an electronic form, making sure that if you have to, you move that to another format, like you move it from a floppy to USB before it's too late. Just keeping up with the information Lodge is producing.
Well, yes, I guess that's a point, but Grand Lodge does tell you to put it on paper. That is the policy of their, whatever committee came up with that. And I think a lodge that is depending on having all of its information, all of its records digitalized, is taking a chance of losing all that.
But that's why I'm saying you need both, right?
You need both. Digitally makes it accessible. It may save it, and paper preserves it much longer.
What are your views on, and this might be a bit of a loaded question, so forgive me in advance, the lodge records as being confidential. All right, let me rephrase. Historical lodge records as being confidential. Because I've been through, I've been through some of those minute books that are 100 years old, even older than that. I found the original register for Windsor Lodge, which, it lists the names of it starts with Davignon, our very first worshipful master, but it lists all the names of the first men to become Windsor Lodge Masons, but also their age when they joined, their occupation. Like, that's information that strikes me that would not only be of benefit to Freemasonry, but to historians, to census takers, to so many people. Genealogists, to so many people in the city. And I've had this debate where people say, well, we shouldn't share historical lodge records like that because it's confidential. And, to my mind, if it's from 1883, it's more valuable as a historical document than as a confidential piece of information.
Yes, it's got your occupation. It's not hard to find out somebody's occupation, especially if you just have to look at me. This is my occupation. Well, it gives you a pretty good idea. I know, Cameron, you went through law school. I got a pretty good idea what your occupation is without knowing.
This is my occupation. This is my occupation right now.
So, that doesn't cut a whole bunch of cheese, or it doesn't hold any water. We're not talking about children here. We're talking about adults, members of the community of Windsor, well-known members. Everybody knew their occupation. Everybody knew how old they are because they knew them all their life. So, it really, I can't think of anything else that would be confidential in the records other than their age and their occupation. Well, you can go into the censuses and get their age. This isn't, go to a cemetery and look at the markers, and you'll get their age. So it's not that big of a deal for me personally. But
do you have any thoughts as to where do you think maybe that hesitancy from lodges can come from? Do you think it's just a holdover from the old Freemasonry should be secret, or where do you think some of this, for lack of a better term, stubbornness or reticence to provide historical information comes from?
If you go back and look at the newspapers, 120 years ago, 130 years ago, 140 years ago, it was published every Friday that Windsor Lodge was having their meeting at such and such a time at the Masonic Temple, and they're going to be putting on a first degree. That was in the newspaper of the day. So, boy, if somebody's trying to keep a secret, they're not doing a very good job. Yes, some of the ritual is intended to have the full impact on the candidate that's going through the various degrees. A secret's probably a good idea to keep it, one secret leads to another. There's a natural progression through the degrees. And if you started telling them what they're going to experience in the next degree, well, it takes away from the impact of that. So, some of the old newsletters that were sent out, it would say on the bottom, strictly confidential. And then they send it to the mail. Well, gee, don't you think that if they send it to my house, my wife's not going to read it? It's kind of, there are parts of the ritual that should remain a secret because of the reason I just gave. As far as being a secret society, come on, we're anything but a secret society. There's, the events of the every Masonic picnic, every Masonic dance, every Masonic church service was front page news. And they you know, last night Windsor Lodge had their installation, and so was installed as worshipful master. And these are all the people that are new officers, and they had dinner, and all the wives got a rose, and you know, this was front page news. So, secret society, no. Secret in the ritual, yes.
I agree with that 100%. I think one of the major mistakes that Freemasonry made, probably starting in the 60s or 70s, I don't know if, well, probably starting in the 60s, because Freemasonry has never, the last year of increase in Masonic membership was 58 to 59. Freemasonry has lost members every year since 1959. Never got to that height again. You know, I don't know if it was, they thought maybe it'd attract membership or what it was, but suddenly Freemasons themselves started to emphasize this idea of being a secret society, as opposed to being a community group, being part of the community. And they completely ignored the fact that you're absolutely right. You know, meetings were regularly announced in the newspaper. The names of the worshipful master, and congratulations to the worshipful master of Great Western. And, you know, Freemasons had business relationships and community relationships with, you know, different groups, just to cater events, to bring things in. They were part of the community. And somewhere along the way, it seems like Freemasonry decided to become insular. I'm not sure why exactly. And I don't understand the benefit of it. The only thing I can think of is they thought by making it more mysterious and more esoteric, it would encourage men to join. But it seems to me it had the exact opposite effect. I don't see it helping at all. But yeah, I think this idea from within Freemasonry that Freemasonry should be a secretive group, I just don't see any historical precedent for that.
It's certainly not historical, because if you even look at the newspapers from 170 years ago, they announced that both this Sunday or this Friday night there's lodge meeting such and such time. They tell you what degree they were putting on. So Masonry communities at that time, they had to rely on them one another much more intimately than they do today. And so I'm losing what I'm trying to point I'm trying to make.
I mean, is this or is that a reflection, do you think, on, or to what extent is Freemasonry kind of stuck with or connected with the times in which it exists? So you think about the 1960s, right, a period of, I wasn't around then at the time, I was born in 83, but from what I'm told on the History Channel, it was a time of pretty significant upheaval and social change. People were a lot less trusting in organizations, it seems like, as a whole, whether it be government or private organizations. People didn't want to necessarily join something with a structure. And then you look at what's happening in 2021, also seems like a pretty significant period of upheaval and challenge. Do you think that, as problems exist in the world, they're bound to affect the ability for Freemasonry to grow or Freemasonry to decline?
Well, what I think Freemasonry has got going against it is the mass media, because 100 years ago, you either sat at home, there was no television, no radio, you sat at home, read a book, or you went down to the lodge and participated in degree work. It gave you something to do. And I think with the advent of mass media after World War II, There was still a communal effect, community-minded individuals that it meant a lot to be part of the community, to be part of an organization. But as television became more and more popular, it was just easier to stay at home and be entertained in your, comfort of your living room. And, I think that's what's hurt Masonry the most. And it's just gotten more and more channels, more television, more, everything. And Masonry goes back to a time where the simplicity of life was different than what it is today.
What does that, I think you're right, but does that mean, or to what extent, how does Masonry respond to mass media? Because it will always be easier, moving forward, unless there's a major change, which I don't see happening, it will always be easier to stay home in your pajamas and watch television than to attend a lodge. Whether, and that's true for a membership, let alone trying to get somebody who's not a member to join and then not stay home in their pajamas and watch Netflix. So how does Freemasonry respond to the ubiquity of media in 2021 and moving forward?
I wish I had the answer to that. I sure wish Grand Lodge had the answer to that. I think the principles that Freemasonry expounds are every bit as relevant today as they were 100 years ago. Every bit. And we've lost some of that. I know in the degrees they talk about perseverance and work. Work is a big thing. Perseverance of your work results in accomplishments. And, I had, at the health club I belonged to, a young man came up to me at the beginning of, about the middle of November, I guess. And he said, if you give me $5,000, like by Christmas time, I could turn it into $250,000. And, I told him, I wasn't born yesterday. And I know the difference between shit and shinola. And, and I thought it just personified that success is easy. Well, no, success is not easy. Success is hard. Real success, real achievements, they're not easy. Superficial achievements, but they're so fleeting. They don't mean anything.
How would you define success?
Success? Well, I don't define success as how much money you make. That could be a barometer, I guess. But success is something that are you fulfilling something in your life that you were meant to? And if you are doing that, then you are successful. Now, there may be varying degrees of success, but if you have a calling to, you were called and you felt a calling to become a lawyer. Are you a good lawyer or a bad lawyer?
I am not licensed to practice law as of this. I think I was a good lawyer when I was working as a lawyer. Who knows?
Well, then you're successful. Success can be something that's so, people are wealthy, but they're not successful because they're crooks. They scam people to get their wealth. They don't contribute back. There are wealthy people who are successful. Bill Gates is an example, a very successful man. He's done a lot with his money. He's made an awful lot of money, but he's tried to give back to the world to make it a better place. So that's that one of the joys of Freemasonry is that if you look at Windsor Lodge, and let's look at the careers of some of the past masters. We've got a whole pile of mayors. We've got a an Ontario Supreme Court justice that was a member of Windsor Lodge. We've got a Stanley Cup hockey player that was in Windsor Lodge. And we've got people that had milk routes, were janitors in the Opera House. But in Masonry, the janitor that was working in the Opera House, he became master of the lodge. So he was, through the Windsor Lodge, he was able to become successful beyond his calling as a janitor.
Going back to the challenge of Freemasonry in an age of mass media, I've been of the view for a while, and I've talked about this in other episodes of the podcast, that at the core of the issue, the very first step to resolving this kind of challenge is we need to change the way Freemasonry is viewed, both internally and externally. I think the first thing we need to do is look at it as a skilled endeavor. And then we need to explain what those skills are to the general public. Because my view has always been, like, if you look at, say, music, for example, or mixed martial arts, boxing, well, sport of any kind, it's incredibly relevant to a lot of people who have no intention of ever being a musician. But the first key is they respect the musician who's up on stage because they recognize his skill and ability. And I think that one of the problems that we face is very few people in the general public, if they're not Masons themselves, and even some people who are Masons, they don't recognize the skill and ability that it takes to be a good Mason. They think being a Mason is just a card you have in your pocket, right? As opposed to an actual something that takes a level of skill and ability to be good at. You can be a shitty Mason very easily.
Sure you can.
Just like you can be, I can pick up a guitar tomorrow and call myself a musician. I'll be a shitty one, but I can call myself one. In the same way, you can be a pretty crappy Mason. But the difference is that everybody would say, well, that person's still a Mason.
And Cameron, you know that there are Masons that have talked to you, that have guided you, that have mentored you, who were great Masons.
Yeah.
Outstanding individuals. And God bless them. I love those men. I've had several that have been so inspiring to me about how to be a Mason, how to be a man. And
Tom Seal.
Tom Seal. Whoa, what a giant! And I want to just I want to share something with you. Going back to what we were talking about, having the attention span. How the mass media has dwindled our attention span down to next to nothing. And I was at the fitness club today, water walking, and there was a guy swimming lengths. And he'd swim a couple of lengths, he'd stop, he'd get his cell phone, he'd check to see if he got any messages, put it down, swim a couple lengths, check his phone to see if he got any messages, put it down. He did that for an hour. He must have, every 2 or 3 lengths he'd stop, get his phone, check, okay, That guy's got the attention span of a gnat. And, that is not going to serve you well in life. And that's what Masonry should be telling us, is that these traits that we believe in will serve you well in life. And
they will serve you well in life, without a doubt. But that goes back to, for every Tom Seal, for every Lou Mackenzie, for every Freeman, for every Jim Lawton, Mort Brodsky, right, that I've met, from my dad for that matter, who have guided me in my Masonic journey, and are skilled Masons and demonstrate the skill it takes to be a Freemason, right? I've also met many who call themselves a Freemason, but can't do ritual work to save their life. They don't know how to set up or tear down a lodge. I'm not talking about a new Mason. I mean, I'm talking about 15, 20-year Masons. They don't know the working tools or where they go. They attend, so sporadically that you wouldn't know that they were part of it. And not only that, but it's one thing to not attend and perhaps give you regrets, especially as an officer. If you're a junior warden or a senior warden, if you're not going to show up, the least you can do is tell the master in advance so you can find a replacement. But they are still, called a Mason and treated the same as a Tom Seal. Which to me, my equivalent would be...
Are they treated the same? Because you're not giving their name, but you're giving Tom Seal's name.
Well, that's a good point. I suppose you could argue that in conversation or in reverence or discussion, obviously if I'm not going to give the name of a Mason who's done a poor job, but I will give the name of a Mason who's done a very good job, in my opinion. But they are still, holding themselves out as Masons and attending lodge and are treated, at least from the time the lodge opens to closes, the same. To me, that'd be equivalent to, if I were to go to a concert, and I don't know if you're a big fan of Prince, but I'm a huge fan of Prince, and, the first act, the first person on stage is Prince, and he does a set, and then the second person on stage is me, and I do a set, and I can't play a guitar to save my life, but at the end of the night, both Prince and I are given, the same amount of money or something to that effect, to be there. Well, will people still respect music the same way? Or will they say, well, if there's no differentiation in skill, if everybody can be a musician, then it doesn't mean the same thing?
Well, I don't think people would respect Prince if he was putting on a show with you as his second act afterwards.
But why not?
Look, Masonry teaches us skills. You have Masons like Tom Seal who live those ideals. And then you have Masons that walk the walk and talk the talk. Well, that's true in life. That's true in every organization. That's true at church. That's true at everywhere. And that's part of the human situation. I can only hope that every Mason, and imagine what kind of fraternity we'd have is that if every Mason strived to live by the principles that Freemasonry teaches, it would be unstoppable. I was putting on a show at an exhibit at the museum once about the history of Masonry, first 200 years of the history of Masonry along the Detroit River. And I had permission to pick up an artifact from a lodge about an hour's drive from here.
Thistle?
Can't say, okay. Wasn't Thistle though, okay. I went there and they didn't want to give it to me. And the secretary came in. And he said, "What's the matter with you guys? Haven't you read the page such and such in our ritual book that you're supposed to help a brother? What's the matter with you guys?" And he quoted that part of our ritual where we're supposed to help one another. And these guys made it feel, and they, get it out of here then, and off we went. But that man lived Masonry. And the guys that were squawking and grumbling, they were very, very weak Masons. I stand behind the guy that lives the Masonic way, the Masonic life, the Masonic tenets. And anybody who lives those with their heart, it's okay. It's one thing to talk. Talk is cheap. It's one thing to live it. And if you live it, your life is going to be precious to everybody around you and to the community. And that's what 100 years ago, the Masons that were members of Windsor Lodge, of Great Western Lodge, they were precious to the community because they were an important part of the community. Now, who's got the flimsiest, whatever, who can come up with on mass media and talk and cheap. It's, mass media has really taken us a step backwards in socially cultivating a society. And I don't know where that's going to end up. I hope like institutions like Freemasonry weather that storm. I believe they will. But we're only going to do it by setting an example to the world of what Freemasonry can do in our lives.
And with that, I think the next question, it is, I don't even know the date, February 4th, 2022. We've just had a couple years, and knock on wood, hopefully it's going to be ending soon, or at least changing soon, of COVID. How do you see Freemasonry, or to what extent do you think Freemasonry has been affected by COVID, by either in Windsor and Essex or beyond, with the shutdown, the government regulated and health measures? How do you think Freemasonry has responded to COVID thus far, and how do you see it coming out of COVID? Do you think there'll be renewed interest? I mean, where do you see Freemasonry moving forward?
I would hope there'd be renewed interest, but I think every social organization has suffered substantially because we are social creatures. And not socializing has not been good for society, has not been good for any of us. And it certainly hasn't been good for Freemasonry, hasn't been good for church. It hasn't been any organization that relies on a social getting together. It's hurt. And that's why I hope there's a rebound when things have changed, when we get over this, that we realize what it means to go without one another, without interacting with one another, that we just realize how precious we are to one another, and we are social creatures. Let's act like it.
And I like what you said. It's something I struggle with because I don't really like people all that much. But I do like what you said where, and that I think is the great shame of the last 2 years, right? You would think that, and I talked about this with a friend of mine in the professional wrestling contest, because I'm involved in professional wrestling. When shows shut down and it became hard to see anything live, professional wrestling or anything else, right? You'd hope that would give people, or make people more appreciative of those things when they come back, and realize how precious it is to go to a concert, to go to a movie, to go to see professional wrestling, to come to Freemasonry,
Mm-hmm.
and give people a sense of, make people just happy to see them return and feel and hold those things precious. Instead, it seems to have been the opposite. It just seems to have created more anger and more division. And instead of reminding people of how precious we are to one another, it just seems to have driven people further and further apart.
It sure looks like that if you read the paper. We have to learned that we have to rely on one another. We can't rely on the government for everything because the government's going to let you down. We have to rely on one another. I put my faith more in people than bureaucrats and institutions. And Masonry, although there is a hierarchy in that, but it's not as pronounced as a...
I mean, there is governance in Freemasonry, obviously. I mean...
There's a governing part.
Grand Lodge has put out various edicts and rules during the last 2 years, which... And you know, one of the things I love about Freemasonry, one of my most favorite parts of the ritual is in the first degree, where we're reminded of the importance of, you know, paying due obedience to the laws of, I don't know, I'm very concerned about an anti-government, anti-authority streak I see forming amongst Freemasons and outside of Freemasonry. I don't see it as helpful. Seems to me just a type of, because I've always worked for the government in one way or the other, except for now. This is the first thing I've done that's not government related, but I mean, I worked in a jail for 5 years. I was a probation officer for 5 years. Both of those were, in some way or another, trying to enforce rules and laws that's set forward by government of Ontario, right? I'm very concerned about that a little bit. Like, government is just people too. Now, you can have disagreements with them. I have many disagreements with, like Justin Trudeau, for example. Prime Minister Trudeau, I think he's made errors, but some of the signs and things I see, like I was wheeling here a couple of days ago, and I saw somebody with a sign, and it said, fuck Trudeau. And it's just like, why? It doesn't seem helpful or healthy, or it's very much, I'm finding it very concerning.
It is concerning. Democracy can be very fragile. And politics is one thing. Our courts, which is the backbone of democracy, is important. And we have to, there are institutions within our democracy that support that. And we have to be very careful that we're not going to start tearing those down. Courts is one, and you get that being a law student.
I'm very hesitant to tear anything down. I think that's my point. I'm very hesitant to...
Well, no, some things should come down.
I don't know.
Let's not be afraid of tearing something down, but let's make sure that we're tearing it down for the right reasons. And
that perhaps there's something there that, I mean, I in my opinion, I can only think of one successful, because to me, a revolution is you tear something down and replace it. And I can only think of one successful revolution in history where the new people were better than the old people, and that's the American Revolution. It seems to me that seems to me like a very incredibly unique and incredibly lucky situation that the American Revolution was led by the people it was led by, many of whom were Freemasons.
And there were intellects too. These were free thinkers. They didn't need somebody to tell them how to think.
It seems though like far more often a revolution, the results of it is that new people are worse than the old people, or at least equally as bad. I'm very hesitant, I hear people talk about we need a revolution, we need to tear down these structures, and
we don't need a revolution.
The people who are saying it, I don't know if it does concern me a little bit.
I don't. It concerns me more so in the States and Canada, but we have it in Canada too. Are the militias and that's scary stuff.
I agree.
And these are, Nazi Germany had the same kind of thing with the SS. These were, the scary stuff. And you have to make sure that the institutions that support democracy are strong. courts, education. We have to have people that know how to think. We can't have a generation that doesn't know how to think for themselves. And those organizations have to be very strong to counteract these militias, some of the anarchists that are around, that they just want to tear down everything. Now there's, when I say tear down things, there's laws that I really don't see the point of having them. There's laws that are ineffective for what they want to do, that a different law would be more effective. I'll give you an example. I was in Nova Scotia and I went camping at the national park, and it's a dark sky preserve. Now, a dark sky preserve is where they don't allow external lighting, and if there is external lighting, it's got to be pointed down.
For night, like stargazing?
Yes. It's been a long time since I saw the Milky Way, and boy, was that ever neat to see the Milky Way again. And I remember as a kid seeing the Milky Way here. Well, when we flew out to go to Halifax, to go camping, we flew over the greenhouses in Leamington. It was disgusting what they're doing to the skies. Just disgusting. There is no consideration that other people may want to see those stars. Well, that's a problem. Why isn't that being fixed? And that's the kind of things I think should be taken down. Not tear down the greenhouse, I'm not saying that. But tell them, look, you've got to stop shooting so much light in the sky. We want to see the stars. We want to save Ojibwe Park because it's a significant natural area. We have to preserve that. Yeah, okay, there's a big box store that wants to build it right next door. Well, maybe that's not the place for the big box store. So,
do you think...
Last question.
I really like... So we're talking about organizations that uphold democracy, or to a more basic sense, just uphold the community, right? Education, the courts. As an organization, what do you believe, or what does Freemasonry provide that acts as a protector or preserver of the community or of democracy? It just off the top of my head, I would say, Freemasonry is an example of organized civility. One of the last civil places we seem to have that exists in the world, right? Where men of different faiths, different beliefs, different politics can all get along. We're not even supposed to talk about politics or religion within a lodge at work. So it seems to me that a space of civility is one of the organizing principles of Freemasonry. But from your perspective, what does Freemasonry provide to the world that can act as a bulwark or protector of the community?
That's a tough question.
It's the last one, so it's got to be tough.
Listen, Freemasonry, you're right. We have Jews, Muslims, Christians in our lodges. We're not fighting any battles here. We're getting together and we're trying to do something good in the world. And that's what Masonry is about. We're getting together, trying to do something good for one another through our ritual. Now, Freemasonry also promotes knowledge. Masonry is big on knowledge. And, that's a pretty important part of democracy is knowledge. So as one of the pillars of democracy, Masonry would be in there with the courts, with education, with Freemasonry, to have a support democracy. Now, I've seen lodge meetings where we've had some pretty big rows over disagreements, but in the end we said, okay, that's behind us now, let's move on. And that's important. That's an example. What I found disturbing about some of the groups today is there's no room for compromise. And I'm not talking about compromising your values, compromising your beliefs, just compromising your actions, compromising your actions as they relate to other people. Your beliefs are your business, but your actions affect other people, and there are organizations that will not change their actions an iota. And that's not good. So, did that answer your question?
It was a hard question, but you answered it very well.
Okay.
I know you said last question, but it'd be remiss if I didn't give you a chance to mention one more time the book you're working on and how far you come along with it and when it might be available.
Okay. Book is, it's called The Anguish of War. My first draft of the book was 1,400 pages in 5 volumes covering 1,400 individuals from Windsor and Essex County who lost their lives during times of war. And I believe that we all know where the war memorials are in our communities, and there's names there, but the names don't mean anything to us. Well, the names had lives behind them. And I wanted to show that these lives that are behind the names on the war memorial are people that loved life every bit as much as you and I do. Every bit. They loved their mothers, they loved their sisters, their fathers. Yet they put that all on the line for what? Well, freedom. And that's a pillar of democracy. And I just thought that I wanted to talk about their lives. So I wrote this book. It's 1,400 pages, it's too long, and nobody's going to read that. So I was very, very fortunate. Found a gentleman that read the book, and he said, this is a good book. I'll edit it for you, and I'll do it for free. So I was very thrilled that not just that he did it for free, but he thought it was a good book. And so we're right now editing a 5-volume book down to 2 volumes without losing the impact of the lives that are in those volumes. And that's a trick. Because, if you have a book this thick, people aren't going to read it. Well, there's no point in writing a book if nobody's going to read it. That's just like having a catalog. And I didn't want this book not to be a catalog. I wanted it to be a book about life and their lives. So I'm hoping to have it out. We're just finishing up the first volume of the edited first volume. We're moving on to the second. It's probably going to be a 2-volume book now, from 5 volumes to 2 volumes. Hopefully we're going to have it published and ready to go by Remembrance Day this year. No guarantees, but it's coming along well, and I'm very happy with it. The other book I'm writing about, if I can say something about Windsor Lodge,
Absolutely.
We've got our 140th anniversary, and I've written a book about all the past masters in the history of Windsor Lodge. And again, what this book talks about the lives of every past master of Windsor Lodge and what they did for the community, what they did for the community, what they did for Windsor Lodge, what they did for the churches they belonged to. And it is these individuals that secrets, well, no, everybody knew who they were. And they did amazing things for the community. And like I said, there were doctors, Supreme Court justices, and janitors that all became masters of Windsor Lodge and contributed to the well-being of this lodge and this city. And that's worth celebrating. So that's what this book's about.
All right, well, keep us informed. It's been great seeing you back in Lodge. It's been great to be back in Lodge. And thank you so much for spending I was going to say a couple minutes. I guess it's been, the timer's going an hour. An hour, 35 seconds. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Cameron.